In the sacred valley of Mecca, a storm was brewing, not a storm of wind or rain, but of grief and mounting hostility. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, stood amid the swirling tide of sorrow, having just endured the most painful year of his life. It was a time that would later be remembered as the Year of Sorrow, a chapter carved deep into the narrative of early Islam, a time when his two greatest human pillars of support were taken from him. First came the passing of his beloved wife, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the one who had believed in his message when no one else did, who comforted him on the night of the first revelation, who gave of her wealth and soul for the cause of Islam. Her absence left a hollow space in his heart that no worldly comfort could fill. She was more than a spouse. She was his refuge, his partner in dawah, and the mother of his children. Soon after, the other towering figure in his life, his uncle Abu Talib, also departed this world. Though he never embraced Islam, Abu Talib had shielded the Prophet from the full fury of the Quraysh. With his death, that shield fell. The Prophet was left vulnerable not only in spirit but in social and political standing. The hostility of the Quraysh, once restrained out of respect for Abu Talib, now erupted without inhibition. The streets of Mecca, which had once echoed with whispers of awe and curiosity about the messenger of God, began to ring with jeers, threats, and schemes against him. His mission, once a quietly spreading call, had now become a dangerous defiance of the established order. The nobility saw in his words a challenge to their idols and pride. The people, conditioned by tribal loyalty and fear, followed suit in rejection. Still, the Prophet did not retreat into bitterness or despair. His grief was not a wall that enclosed him, but a fire that refined his resolve. He turned more fully to the divine, spending his nights in prayer and his days seeking every possible path to bring the message of Islam to those who had not yet heard or who might yet be willing to listen. With Mecca's door closing more tightly around him, he began to look beyond the valley, seeking hearts that might be more open, ears that might be more willing. It was in this fragile and difficult moment that his attention turned toward the city of Ta'if. Ta'if, nestled in the mountains southeast of Mecca, was a place of natural beauty and strategic promise. It was home to the tribe of Ta'if, a people of wealth, influence, and strong connection to the economic and religious life of the Hijaz. To the Prophet, Ta'if represented more than a geographical escape. It was a vision of potential, a society that, if guided to Islam, could become a new sanctuary, a base for the spreading light of revelation. In the wake of profound personal loss, this journey was not an escape from grief, but a continuation of mission. He carried with him no army, no wealth, no threats. He bore only the truth of his message, the sincerity of his heart, and a plea for peace and understanding. The decision to travel to Ta'if was not made lightly. It meant a journey on foot of nearly 50 miles through rocky desert terrain. The Prophet was not a young man of ease or privilege. He was already bearing the weight of age, sorrow, and persecution. Yet, he walked with determination, accompanied only by his adopted son and loyal companion, Zayd ibn Haritha. Their footsteps pressed into the dust, guided not by maps or caravans, but by the light of conviction and the hope that somewhere, someone would listen. One can imagine them traveling under the fierce Arabian sun, the heat pressing down on their shoulders, the silence of the wilderness only broken by the crunch of their sandals on the stony path. They carried little and expected less in return. Their mission was simple but monumental: to present Islam to the leaders of Ta'if in the hope that they would accept the truth or, at the very least, offer refuge from the escalating persecution in Mecca. The Prophet's heart was full of prayer, not for himself but for the guidance of others, for the fulfillment of the divine mission entrusted to him at Hira. The journey itself was a test, not only of physical endurance but of spiritual clarity. In every step, the Prophet was drawing closer not only to a city but to another threshold of prophetic experience. He knew that rejection was possible, even likely, but hope is the fuel of the dawah. He was not seeking worldly gain, but the establishment of a foundation where the word of Allah could be spoken freely, where the oppressed could find justice, and where the future of the Muslim Ummah could take root in peace. In his mind and heart, This mission was not just about the present. It was for the children yet unborn, for the generations that would look back and find in his sacrifice the blueprint of perseverance. By the time they neared the city gates of Taif, the prophet had already poured out miles of effort and prayer. His body may have been tired, but his heart was vibrant with the yearning to reach even one soul who would accept the truth. This was the strength of his character. He did not measure success by numbers or applause, but by sincerity of intention and submission to the will of Allah. His sorrow had not made him bitter. It had made him gentler, more understanding, more radiant in his patience. This was a man whose love for humanity did not diminish with rejection, but grew purer the more he was denied. As they looked upon the homes and hills of Taif, there must have been a breath of anticipation. Perhaps this city, unlike Mecca, would see the value in his words. Perhaps the people here, untouched by the hardness of Qurayshi pride, would recognize the truth in his message. Perhaps Allah had chosen this moment as the beginning of a new chapter, a new alliance, a new dawn. Whatever the outcome, the prophet had come with sincerity, hope, and the unshakable faith that his duty was to convey the message, whether it was embraced or rejected. That alone was his burden, and that alone was his peace. In the quiet before the first conversation, in the shade of a tree or the whisper of wind over the mountains, the prophet waited not for honor or ease, but for the opportunity to speak the truth, to extend the mercy of Islam to another people. Behind him lay a city that scorned him. Ahead of him lay a people he did not yet know. But above him was the mercy of Allah, and within him was a heart that still beat with love for all of humanity. This was not the journey of a man seeking refuge. This was the journey of a messenger whose trust in God was unshaken, even when the world around him fell into shadows. The path to Taif stretched long and unforgiving beneath the feet of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and his loyal companion Zayd ibn Haritha. It was not merely a journey between two cities, nor was it simply a change in strategy. It was a mission shaped by deep trust in the mercy of Allah, carried forward by feet that were weary but hearts that were firm. Every step taken across the sun-scorched land was fueled by a desire that transcended personal relief or political advantage. The prophet was not fleeing Mecca. He was reaching toward hope, seeking out souls who had not yet been clouded by the hostility that now hung heavy over his homeland. As they left the familiar contours of Mecca behind, the prophet and Zayd would have passed through the outskirts where the arid desert slowly began to give way to the higher, greener terrain leading toward Taif. The journey, spanning roughly 50 to 60 miles, was no small feat. The terrain was rugged, the path uneven, and the summer heat bore down on them like a weight. Yet neither complained, for the prophet had endured far worse for the sake of his mission. His heart was neither hardened nor cynical. He remained steadfast, believing that perhaps in Taif he would find people willing to listen. Perhaps there he could plant the seeds of something greater, even if Mecca remained barren for now. There were no camels to ease the way, no procession to announce their arrival. They traveled humbly, as two simple men carrying a message from the Lord of the worlds. The prophet's appearance was unassuming, his clothes plain, his provisions modest. Yet within him was a message that could change the destiny of nations. He did not bring it with the trappings of power, nor cloak it in promises of wealth. Instead, he came with truth, with a call to righteousness, and with the weight of revelation that had descended upon him in the stillness of the cave at Hira. The prophet's journey to Taif was undertaken after years of ridicule, boycotts, slander, and outright physical abuse at the hands of the Quraysh. He had been mocked in the streets, his followers tortured, his name smeared. He had lost Khadija, whose love and unwavering faith had nourished him in his loneliest hours. He had lost Abu Talib, whose tribal protection had shielded him from the full brunt of Qurayshi violence. Now, standing at the edge of Taif, he carried not only the burden of grief, but also the tremendous responsibility of preserving the message and its people. Taif offered a glimmer of opportunity. It was a place known for its wealth, agriculture, and cultural prominence. Its people, the tribe of Thaqif, were proud and independent. Though they had close ties to the Quraysh, They retained their own identity and sphere of influence. If they embraced the message of Islam, even partially, the Prophet believed it could mark a turning point. Ta'if could become a refuge for the believers, a place where the message could spread without fear of violence. The Prophet did not view it as an escape route. He saw it as fertile soil that, with patience and guidance, might bear fruit. He was not chasing comfort. He was searching for hearts open to truth. Zayd ibn Haritha walked beside him, unwavering in loyalty. He had been with the Prophet through trials both personal and public. He had known him not only as a messenger but as a man of character, compassion, and unwavering principle. In the harsh sun of Arabia, as dust clung to their clothes and the road wound on, Zayd's devotion never wavered. It was not uncommon for him to offer words of encouragement or shield the Prophet when danger approached. But on this journey, there was a silence between them that needed no filling. They both knew the stakes. They both knew the pain they carried from Mecca. And they both shared the hope that perhaps, in the valley of Ta'if, something might change. The journey would have taken several days. They likely rested beneath sparse trees, took shelter in the shadow of hills, and relied on whatever small supplies they had brought. There was no honor guard, no trumpet of reception, only the quiet hum of the desert wind and the call of birds echoing across the open land. At night, under the stars, the Prophet likely stood in prayer as he always did, lifting his hands to the sky and asking for guidance, mercy, and strength. He did not pray for ease, but for the ability to fulfill his duty. He did not pray for victory, but for the chance to be heard. His dua was not shaped by ambition, but by a deep and tender love for humanity. He wanted them to be saved. He wanted them to know their Lord. Even those who had beaten him, cursed him, and driven him to this journey, he still prayed for their guidance. As they neared Ta'if, the landscape changed. The dry heat softened into a cooler breeze. The terrain grew greener, dotted with gardens and fruit trees. It was a sharp contrast to the harshness of Mecca. The Prophet would have seen the vineyards and the orchards, and felt the ease in the air. But his heart remained fixed on his purpose. He was not distracted by the comforts of the city. His mission remained clear: to present the message of Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, to the chieftains of Ta'if, and to ask for their support in providing a safe haven for this growing but vulnerable faith. There was no fear in his steps as he entered Ta'if, only humility and patience. He did not approach with accusations or condemnation. He came with gentleness, as he always did. His words were measured, his tone sincere. He asked to speak with the leaders of the city, hoping to appeal to their sense of justice, their sense of reason. He presented Islam as he always had, not as a threat but as a light. He invited them to consider the truth of revelation, to see beyond their idols, and to imagine a society grounded in mercy, equity, and the worship of the one true God. At that moment, the weight of his journey converged into a single act of courage, speaking the truth in a place where he had no allies, no kin, and no guarantees. He stood not as a conqueror but as a servant, offering a gift whose value many still failed to see. But he did not hold back. He did not hesitate. Whether the people of Ta'if accepted him or rejected him, his mission was to try. That effort, that sincerity, was already a victory in the eyes of his Lord. Before any answer was given, before stones were raised or doors were shut, the Prophet had already fulfilled his duty. He had arrived, he had spoken, he had hoped, and he had placed the outcome in the hands of Allah. The pain that would follow was yet unseen, but his trust in his Creator was already complete. Whatever lay ahead, he would endure it not for himself, but for the generations that would one day find guidance in his steps, strength in his trials, and light in his journey to Ta'if. The city of Ta'if stood as a gleaming jewel nestled in the hills southeast of Mecca. Its breezes were cooler, its soil more fertile, and its people proud of their independence and prosperity. Known for its orchards and vineyards, Ta'if was a place of relative affluence, far removed from the parched harshness of the desert valley from which the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, had come. Though only a few days' journey from Mecca, it was a city with its own identity and leadership. held by the respected tribe of Thaqif, who had long prided themselves on their stature and culture. For the Prophet, this new city represented more than just a place of potential refuge. It was a place of strategic and spiritual hope, a new door that, if opened, might allow the light of Islam to spread freely where it had been violently suppressed elsewhere. As he approached the city limits, the Prophet was not unaware of what lay ahead. He knew the hearts of men were not easily turned, especially those who had wealth and authority. Still, he did not come to demand, nor did he present himself as someone to be feared. He came with humility, as a man entrusted with a message of divine truth. He had no weapons, no entourage, no gifts to entice or threaten. His only companion was Zayd ibn Haritha, and his only provisions were sincerity and prayer. The Prophet was prepared to speak with wisdom and patience, hoping that his words might awaken the hearts of those who had not yet heard the call of Islam untainted by Qurayshi slander. Upon entering Taif, he directed his efforts toward the leadership. He sought an audience with the sons of Amr ibn Umair al-Thaqafi, who held considerable sway over the city's affairs. The three brothers Abdu Yalil, Masud, and Habib were regarded as the elders of influence, whose word carried weight among the tribe and beyond. The Prophet approached them with respect, introduced himself, and began to convey the message he had carried for more than a decade. His words were not hurried. He spoke of the oneness of God, of justice, of compassion for the weak, and of the need to abandon idolatry. He called them toward worship of the Creator alone and invited them to consider the profound truths of revelation. His tone was gentle but firm, always respectful, always clear. The three men listened, not with open hearts, but with eyes that measured him for weakness and voices that tested his endurance. They saw not a messenger of God, but a man from Mecca who came without position or power, making bold claims that threatened their traditions. One of them, with a mocking tone, asked if God could find no one better than Muhammad to entrust with revelation. Another sneered and said he would not speak with the Prophet, for fear that speaking the truth might obligate him to follow it. The third dismissed him entirely, refusing to give his words any seriousness. Their ridicule was not casual. It was designed to humiliate, to wound. Yet the Prophet did not raise his voice in protest, nor did he curse them for their insolence. He bore their scorn with a dignity that came not from pride but from knowledge of his mission. He had not come seeking flattery or praise. He had come because Allah had commanded him to spread the message of truth, and in fulfilling that duty, even humiliation had its place. When the brothers refused him, he did not argue endlessly. He did not beg. He turned away from them with sadness in his heart, not for himself, but for the opportunity they had rejected. Their decision meant not only the refusal of safety and support, but the continued veil over their own hearts. But it was not enough for them simply to say no. As word of his presence spread, the leaders of Taif took measures to make sure their rejection was public and punishing. They stirred up the street boys, the slaves, and the ignorant among the townspeople. They incited them to form a mob. As the Prophet walked away from the gathering, stones began to fly. Shouts filled the air, not of curiosity, but of hate. He was pelted by the very people he had hoped to uplift. Stones struck his legs and arms, his sandals filled with blood. Zayd ibn Haritha, ever loyal, did what he could to shield the Prophet's body, and in doing so, he too was wounded. But the stones kept coming, and the road out of Taif became a corridor of cruelty, lined not with respect or even indifference, but with laughter and violence. There was no alley to duck into, no friend to offer shelter. They continued walking until they were well outside the city, stumbling from pain and exhaustion. Eventually, they reached a vineyard on the outskirts, owned by two distant relatives of the Prophet from the Quraysh, Utbah and Shayba ibn Rabia. Though not Muslims, these men watched the spectacle from a distance and felt a trace of shame. Perhaps because of old family ties, or perhaps from the sheer indecency of what they had witnessed, they allowed the Prophet and Zayd to take rest in the shade of their orchard. There, in that fragile pocket of calm after the storm, the Prophet Saithi's body bleeding, his heart bruised, his mission seemingly shattered once again. One can imagine the silence that surrounded him in that orchard, The vines hung heavy with fruit. The breeze moved gently through the leaves, but the prophet's mind was still with the people of Taif, still aching over their response. He did not curse them. He did not speak of revenge. He turned instead to the one who sent him. In pain, he raised his hands and offered a supplication that would echo through the centuries, a dua of heartbreak and total surrender. But that moment comes later. For now, in the stillness of the orchard, he bore his wounds quietly. He had hoped that Taif might become a place of light. Instead, it had turned its back on him with cruelty unmatched even in Mecca. Even in this moment of rejection, the prophet's resolve did not break. Though his body was wounded and his heart heavy, his trust in Allah remained as firm as the mountains. He had come to Taif with the best of intentions. He had offered them the truth with kindness and patience. Their rejection was not his failure. His effort had been sincere, and that was all his Lord had required of him. What they did with the message was their choice. What he had to do was continue, even if it meant walking wounded back into a world that had already turned against him. In Taif, the Prophet Muhammad faced not only the refusal of his message but an assault on his humanity. Yet he would leave the city with no malice in his heart. He did not seek vengeance. He would not even allow his companions, later on, to curse the people of Taif. Instead, he would continue to walk the path his Lord had laid for him, one step at a time, even when those steps were marked by rejection, pain, and blood. His strength lay not in armies or wealth, but in a heart that refused to turn bitter, and in a mission that no amount of mockery could silence. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, had come to Taif with hope in his heart and the dignity of a messenger on his lips. His words had been sincere, offered with the care and compassion of someone who truly wished to lift others toward truth and salvation. He had spoken to the leaders of Thaqif not as an enemy or rival, but as a brother calling his people to worship the one who had created them. Yet their rejection had not been a quiet dismissal, nor a private refusal. It had been public, scornful, and cruel. The prophet had not only been denied the protection and acceptance he had sought, but he had been humiliated in a manner designed to wound more than just his body. As he turned away from the leaders of Taif, there must have been a heavy silence between him and Zayd ibn Haritha. They had come so far with such fragile hope. Now, with the gates of the city closing behind them, they found themselves not only empty-handed, but surrounded by a growing crowd that had been stirred into a frenzy. The leaders of Thaqif had done more than turn away the prophet. They had unleashed their townspeople upon him, commanding the children, slaves, and reckless among them to drive him out of their city like a criminal. This was no ordinary crowd of hecklers. They came with stones in their hands and hatred in their eyes. The prophet began to walk, and with each step the stones came faster. They struck his legs, his arms, his back. Zayd did everything he could to shield the prophet's body, placing himself in harm's way, calling out for mercy that would not come. Blood ran down the prophet's face. It seeped into his garments, pooled in his sandals, and mixed with the dust of the road. But still he kept walking. He did not curse them. He did not strike back. He simply walked forward, covering his head, turning his face, enduring what would later be remembered as one of the darkest moments of his mission. What happened on that road out of Taif was more than physical pain. It was an assault on the prophet's honor, a rejection so fierce and so personal that few men could have borne it with any grace, let alone patience. These were not strangers in a distant land. These were people of the same region, the same tongue, the same noble heritage. They had not only rejected the message of God, but had mocked and tormented the one who brought it. To walk away in silence from such abuse is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. The stones did not fall only on skin and bone. They struck at something deeper. The prophet had come offering peace, mercy, and truth. To be answered with such violence was a pain that only he, in the fullness of his love for creation, could truly feel. This was not a man who sought power for himself. He was a messenger who cried for his people at night, who gave from his food when he had none for himself, who made dua for his enemies even as they plotted his death. And now he was being chased from a city like an animal. When they finally reached the outskirts of Taif, the prophet's strength was spent. He was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted. Zayd, too, was injured, though his concern remained for the Prophet. They found shade in a nearby orchard, a small patch of peace amid a storm of cruelty. The orchard belonged to Utbah and Sheba, two men of the Quraysh, who had been watching the scene unfold from a distance. Though they were not believers, and though they were part of the tribe that had long opposed the Prophet, they were moved by what they saw. There was something in their hearts that could not allow them to ignore the suffering of a man so noble, so broken in body yet unbroken in spirit. They sent one of their Christian servants, a young man named Addis, to bring the Prophet some grapes. Addis approached with a bowl of fruit, perhaps unsure of the man before him. What he saw was not a beggar or a defeated preacher. He saw a man whose dignity remained untouched by the humiliation he had endured. As the Prophet reached for the grapes, he whispered a word that startled Addis. He said, "Bismillah," invoking the name of God before eating. Addis had never heard anyone in that region speak in such a way. He asked the Prophet where he had learned those words, and the Prophet replied with kindness, speaking to him about the Prophet Yunus, a name that Addis, as a Christian from Nineveh, recognized with awe. In that brief conversation, the air around them shifted. The pain of Taif was still fresh, but here was a soul that responded to truth. Addis was moved. He listened, his heart stirred by the Prophet's words and presence, and then he did something that none of the powerful men of Taif had done. He kissed the Prophet's hands and head, a gesture of respect and affection. The Prophet, bloodied and broken, had reached a heart not by force or argument, but through sincerity and light. It was a small moment, but to the Prophet, it was not small at all. It was a sign that Allah does not abandon His servants, even in their lowest hours. Still, the pain of rejection lingered. After Addis left, the Prophet and Zayd continued to rest in the orchard. There was nowhere else to go, no friends in Taif, and Mecca itself remained hostile. Yet in that quiet space, surrounded by vines and silence, the Prophet did not despair. His heart turned not to vengeance, but to his Lord. He would soon raise his hands and make a dua that would echo through the hearts of believers for centuries to come. But even before that supplication, his patience spoke for him. What he had endured on the road out of Taif was among the greatest trials of his mission, not for the physical suffering alone, but for the totality of the rejection it represented. Here was a man who had lost his wife and uncle, been cast out by his own people, and now publicly assaulted in a city where he had come only to offer light. Yet his response was not bitterness. It was not retaliation. It was submission to the will of Allah, and a hope that, somewhere down the line, these same people might one day remember and believe. Years later, when the Prophet returned to Taif after the conquest of Mecca, he would have the power to seek retribution, but he did not. He showed the same people who had driven him out with stones the same mercy he had always shown. This was not forgetfulness. This was prophetic character. It began on the road out of Taif, in the dust and blood of rejection, where the Prophet's true strength shone brightest. Not in miracles or victories, but in the ability to endure humiliation with grace, to meet cruelty with forbearance, and to keep walking, even when the road was soaked in sorrow. In the stillness that followed the storm of rejection, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, sat beneath the shade of trees in the orchard outside Taif. His body bore the marks of a violent welcome, with blood drying on his skin and his sandals heavy from the wounds that had opened on his feet and legs. His companion, Zayd ibn Haritha, watched him with concern and quiet pain, knowing full well that the suffering they had just endured could have shattered the resolve of any ordinary man. But the Prophet was no ordinary man. Though his frame sagged with exhaustion, and his face bore the lines of sadness, there remained in him a calm that came not from comfort but from complete trust in Allah. The orchard, green and serene, felt like another world compared to the chaos they had just left behind. The leaves above them whispered gently with the breeze, and the soil beneath their feet was soft. Yet in this peaceful setting, the Prophet carried within him the weight of deep sorrow. He had walked for miles with hope in his heart, only to be met with mockery and violence. He had spoken with gentleness, only to be answered with stones. The sting of rejection was not new to him, but this moment had brought with it a kind of solitude that reached into his bones. There were no supporters in Taif, no protectors left in Mecca, no comfort to be found except in the remembrance of the one who had sent him. It was in this moment of total human weakness, when every worldly support had been stripped away, that the prophet turned to the only one who had never failed him. His heart lifted to the heavens, not in complaint, but in surrender. He raised his voice in prayer, a dua that has become one of the most profound and beautiful examples of human submission and divine reliance. He did not ask for revenge. He did not beg for ease. He poured his heart out with a humility so deep that every word revealed both the pain of a man and the clarity of a messenger who knew that he belonged entirely to Allah. "O Allah," he said, "to you alone I complain of my weakness, my lack of resources, and the humiliation I have suffered at the hands of people." His words did not mask his vulnerability. He admitted his frailty, not out of despair, but because he knew that true strength lies in acknowledging our need for the one who gives us strength. He did not seek to hide his exhaustion or his sense of isolation. He brought it forward, laid it bare, and placed it in the hands of his Lord. He continued, "O most merciful of the merciful, you are the Lord of the oppressed, and you are my Lord." In these words, the prophet affirmed a truth that anchored him through every trial. Allah is not distant from the pain of his servants. He is not absent when the world turns away. He is the Lord of those who have no other Lord, the refuge of those who have been cast out. In affirming this, the prophet was not merely speaking for himself. He was speaking for every believer who would ever feel alone, for every soul that would ever feel abandoned by the world. His words echoed with the depth of prophetic wisdom, a reminder that mercy is always near, even when cruelty seems to reign. He asked, "To whom have you entrusted me? To a distant stranger who shows me hostility, or to an enemy whom you have given power over me?" Here, the prophet revealed his complete dependence on Allah's guidance. He was not afraid of people, nor did he resent those who had hurt him. His fear was only that he might be left without the nearness of his Lord. His pain was not rooted in pride or wounded ego. It was rooted in the fear of being left alone in the mission that he had been given, a mission so sacred that he would rather endure any hardship than see it fall from his hands. Then came the words that have moved hearts across generations. "If you are not angry with me, then I do not care." These words capture the very essence of prophetic character. The prophet did not measure success by comfort or failure by pain. His only concern was the pleasure of Allah. If Allah was still with him, if the rejection of Taif did not mean divine displeasure, then nothing else mattered. The bruises, the blood, the loneliness, all of it became insignificant in the face of his love for his Lord. This was not a man broken by rejection. This was a soul purified by submission. He went on, "But your favor is more expansive for me." In this line, even while expressing contentment with whatever Allah willed, he turned to hope. He knew that Allah's mercy was vast, greater than the sky above him, greater than the hatred he had faced. He held to that mercy like a rope in the darkness, trusting that somewhere in the plan of his Lord, this moment of pain was only a passage towards something better. He did not see himself as defeated. He saw himself as being tested, and he welcomed the test with grace. Finally, he concluded his dua with praise and humility. "I seek refuge in the light of your face, which brings light to the darkness, and through which all matters in this world and the next are made right. May it never be that I incur your anger, or that you are displeased with me. To you belongs all power, until you are pleased. There is no power and no strength except with you." These were not empty phrases. They were the essence of his heart poured out in words. He was not bargaining with Allah. He was seeking nearness. He was reaffirming his absolute surrender to divine will, even in the face of what the world would see as failure. In that orchard outside Taif, the prophet reached the summit of spiritual strength by descending into the valley of complete dependence on his Lord. His bloodied feet, his wounded body, his aching heart, all of it was offered back to Allah, with nothing held in reserve. He did not ask for relief. He asked for alignment with divine pleasure. In that prayer, he achieved a kind of victory greater than any military conquest or worldly triumph. He showed that the true power of a messenger lies not in the ability to command armies, but in the ability to submit to Allah with sincerity that nothing can shake. Zayd, watching this moment, must have felt the profound stillness that settled in its wake. He had seen the Prophet weep before in prayer. He had seen him plead for his people in the darkness of night. But this was something else. This was the heart of prophecy laid bare. And even though the road ahead remained uncertain, even though Mecca was no more welcoming than it had been before, the Prophet rose from that prayer with his strength renewed. He had not gained the support of Taif, but he had reaffirmed his connection with the one whose support mattered most. He had been rejected by men, but embraced more deeply by his Lord. And in that orchard, with no one around but a wounded friend in the quiet trees, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, reached one of the most exalted moments of his entire mission. Not because of success, but because of surrender. Not because of worldly honor, but because of divine nearness. That prayer, spoken through cracked lips and a heavy heart, remains a timeless example of how a believer turns to Allah when the world offers nothing but pain. It teaches that in the depths of rejection one can still find the highest embrace. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, sat in the shaded orchard on the outskirts of Taif, his prayer still echoed in the quiet. The pain in his body remained, but in his heart there was peace. He had spoken to his Lord not with bitterness but with love. His voice had carried no demand for vengeance, only a yearning for mercy. In that sacred moment of surrender, something shifted. The visible world had turned away from him with cruelty, but the unseen world was drawing near. Help would come, not in the form of armies or alliances, but in the form of compassion and quiet recognition from the most unexpected places. The owners of the orchard, Utbah and Sheba, two sons of the Quraysh, had been watching the events from a distance. They were not followers of the Prophet's message, but they were men of nobility who had been raised in a culture that valued hospitality and honor. Though they belonged to the same tribe that had opposed and persecuted the Prophet in Mecca, they were still moved by what they had seen. Perhaps they were ashamed at how their fellow Arabs had treated a guest. Perhaps they simply could not bear to witness such unprovoked cruelty. Whatever their reasons, they sent their servant to offer some comfort to the wounded man resting beneath their trees. The servant's name was Adas. He was a young Christian man, originally from the land of Nineveh, a region steeped in the stories of the earlier prophets. Adas was not from the people of Arabia, nor was he part of the hostilities that had marked the Prophet's journey. He came as a stranger, bringing a small bowl of grapes. When he approached and placed the fruit before the Prophet, there was no ceremony in his steps, no expectation in his heart. He was performing an act of service, perhaps instructed to do so without question. But what unfolded between him and the Prophet in the moments that followed would become a profound moment of recognition, far deeper than the simple exchange of food. The Prophet reached out his hand and, before taking a single grape, quietly said, "In the name of Allah." Adas paused. The words were unfamiliar, yet striking. He had never heard the people of Taif or the Quraysh speak in this way. Intrigued, he leaned forward and asked, "What are these words you have just spoken?" "The people here do not say them." The Prophet looked at him with warmth and replied, "They are the words I use before eating. I am Muhammad, the son of Abdullah. I am a messenger of Allah, and I have been sent with the final revelation to guide people to worship their Creator alone." Adas listened with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The Prophet, noticing the flicker of interest in his eyes, gently asked, "Where are you from, O Adas?" The young man answered, "I am from Nineveh." The Prophet's face lit with recognition. "From the city of the righteous man, Yunus ibn Matta." Adas was startled. This man, bruised and bloodied in a foreign land, spoke with familiarity about a prophet whose story was part of his own faith. "How do you know of Yunus?" he asked. The Prophet replied, "He was a prophet, and I am a prophet. He is my brother in prophethood." In that moment, a bridge formed between them. They had never met before, and they came from different lands and traditions, but the truth of the Prophet's words cut through all barriers. Adas felt something stir within him, something deeper than admiration or sympathy. He saw in the Prophet's eyes a sincerity he had never encountered, He had expected to see a man crushed by pain, defeated by rejection. Instead, he saw dignity and peace, the kind that only comes from a soul rooted in divine truth. Without thinking, Adas bent down and kissed the prophet's head, his hands, and his feet. These were the same feet that had been wounded by stones, the same hands that had been raised in supplication only moments earlier. Now, touched by reverence and belief, they became the site of recognition. Adas embraced Islam then and there. He accepted that the man before him was not an ordinary preacher, but a true prophet. The heart of a servant, free from arrogance and pride, had opened to the message that so many of the powerful had refused. When Adas returned to Utbah and Sheba, they were surprised by what they saw. "Woe to you, Adas," they said. "Why did you kiss that man?" Adas replied, his voice full of quiet certainty, "There is nothing on this earth better than him. He told me things that only a prophet could know." They scoffed at his words, reminding him that his religion was not the religion of the people of their tribe. But Adas was no longer the same man who had walked into the orchard carrying grapes. Something in him had changed. The truth had found its way to his heart in the softest, simplest of encounters. For the prophet, this brief moment with Adas was not just a consolation, it was a sign. In the midst of rejection and pain, Allah had sent him someone who would believe. Not a leader, not a wealthy patron, but a humble servant. This was the nature of divine mercy. Where the world offered closed doors, Allah opened another. Where the people of status had mocked and driven him out, a man with no power had kissed his feet in love and belief. The prophet did not measure success by numbers. He did not despair because a city had rejected him. He rejoiced because one heart had opened. This moment also revealed the wider wisdom behind trials. The suffering he had endured was not without purpose. It purified, clarified, and prepared him for what would come. And even within the suffering, there were moments of light. The prophet's character remained radiant, his patience unshaken. He did not let pain dictate his response. He continued to meet every soul with compassion. He did not know that Adas would be the one to believe, but he welcomed him with the same warmth and truth that he would have offered to the leaders of Thaqif. After some time, the prophet and Zayd rose from the orchard. Their wounds still throbbed. The path ahead was still uncertain. They had no allies in Ta'if, and Mecca remained a place of danger. Yet they walked forward with hearts strengthened by what had just taken place. The prophet had spoken his message. He had made his prayer. And now he had seen that even in the darkest hour, Allah sent light in ways no one could have expected. This quiet encounter in a garden remains one of the most beautiful moments in the prophet's life, not for its drama or its scale, but for its purity. It showed that truth does not always triumph in grand assemblies or before crowds. Sometimes, it finds its home in the heart of a single individual, one who listens, who reflects, and who recognizes the light when it comes. Adas had nothing to gain from belief. He had no position to protect, no wealth to preserve, but he had sincerity, and that sincerity became a vessel for faith. For the prophet, this was enough. The journey to Ta'if was not in vain. Though the city had cast him out, one soul had embraced the truth, and in that he found a quiet victory. A reminder that his mission was not measured by worldly success, but by obedience to Allah and the spread of mercy wherever it might be accepted. The orchard in Ta'if became not only a place of refuge, but a place of renewal. From its shaded corner, the prophet would rise again, ready to continue the mission, one heart at a time. The road back to Mecca was long, and for the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, it carried more than the weight of distance. With every step away from Ta'if, he walked not only with wounds on his body, but with the quiet ache of rejection in his soul. Behind him lay a city that had refused his call, not with polite indifference, but with public cruelty and mockery. The stones that had bloodied his feet were no longer in view, but their memory lingered in the tightness of each step. Still, the prophet did not retreat into grief. He did not turn his heart away from his mission. He continued forward, trusting in the wisdom of Allah, believing that his duty was not to deliver results, but to carry the truth wherever he could. Zayd ibn Haritha remained at his side, ever faithful, bearing his own share of bruises from the attacks they had suffered. He had watched as the prophet was struck and insulted, had tried to shield him, and had suffered for his loyalty. Yet not once did he speak of retreat or regret. His strength came from the one he followed. The prophet had taught him to place trust in Allah, and in that trust, even hardship became bearable. Together, they moved through the valleys and across the ridges, seeking shelter where they could, sustained by the same hope that had carried them to Taif in the first place. That hope had not been extinguished. It had merely been redirected. The return journey offered no celebration, no company of believers awaiting their arrival. The land was quiet, except for the wind and the sounds of nature around them. There was no crowd to greet them, no comfort waiting at the end of the path. What lay ahead was another challenge, perhaps more delicate than what had come before. For although the prophet was returning to the land of his birth, he was not returning to a home that welcomed him. Mecca was still steeped in hostility. The Quraysh had only become more aggressive since the death of Abu Talib. Without his uncle's protection, the prophet's position had become even more fragile. As he neared Mecca, the prophet faced a sobering reality. He could not simply enter the city, as he once had. In the tribal system of the time, protection was essential. A person without protection from a powerful clan could be attacked, insulted, or even killed without consequence. The prophet knew this. His return required more than determination. It required finding someone willing to stand for him, someone who could offer him the security he no longer possessed. He would need a guarantor, a figure of standing who could announce to the Quraysh that Muhammad was under his protection. Without such a declaration, his re-entry into Mecca could place him in grave danger. The prophet began to send messages to various influential figures in the Quraysh, asking them to grant him the right to return safely to the city. One by one, they refused. Some ignored the request altogether. Others declined out of fear of aligning themselves with someone who had become a target of the elite. The prophet had once been admired for his honesty and character, but now, in the eyes of many Quraysh, he was a threat to their traditions, their gods, and their control over the people. To grant him protection was to take a stand, and very few were willing to take that risk. At last, one man stepped forward. His name was Mutim ibn Adi. He was not a Muslim, and he did not believe in the prophet's message, but he was a man of principle, someone who still valued the ancient codes of honor and hospitality that had long defined the Arabian tribes. He had watched the growing violence against the prophet with concern, and he understood that to allow a man to be harmed simply because of his beliefs was a stain on the dignity of their society. When he received the prophet's request, he agreed. He would offer him protection, not because he accepted Islam, but because he refused to let injustice prevail unchecked. Mutim gathered his sons and armed members of his clan and led them through the streets of Mecca. They formed a visible, unmistakable escort, a line of honor that declared their commitment to the safety of the man they now shielded. Word spread quickly among the Quraysh. The image of Mutim walking through the city with Muhammad under his protection sent a message that could not be ignored. The prophet was no longer alone. He had found refuge in the very city that had tried to break him. Though it was a fragile kind of safety, it was safety nonetheless, and it allowed him to resume his mission, to continue calling people to truth, even within a place that still bristled with opposition. The prophet walked into Mecca not with pride, but with quiet dignity. He had been turned away from Taif with violence. Now he returned to Mecca with the protection of a man who did not share his faith, yet understood the value of justice. It was a moment that revealed the complexity of human relations during this period. The prophet did not view Mutim with suspicion or disdain. He respected him for what he had done. And when Mutim passed away sometime later, the prophet would remember his act of generosity with deep gratitude, saying that had Mutim still been alive and asked him for the release of prisoners, he would have granted it. This return to Mecca under the banner of protection also showed the prophet's wisdom in dealing with the practical realities of his time. He did not demand miracles to shield him from harm. He worked within the social structures of his society, navigating them with care and integrity. He did not reject the help of non-Muslims when it was offered with sincerity. He accepted it, honored it, and remained true to his principles in every step he took. His reliance was always on Allah, but his actions reflected a deep understanding of the world around him. Back in Mecca, the Prophet resumed his mission with the same patience and determination that had always guided him. The rejection of Taif had left scars, but it had not closed the path forward. If anything, it had deepened his clarity and strengthened his resilience. He continued to preach, to meet people in secret gatherings, to teach the Quran to those who came with open hearts. The city was still dangerous, the hostility still present, but the message continued to move, reaching ears and stirring hearts in ways that even the Quraysh could not fully control. The Prophet did not speak of Taif with anger. He did not recount his suffering in a way that demanded pity or vengeance. He carried it as part of his journey, another chapter in the long story of calling to Allah. In time, he would return to Taif, not with weapons, but with an open heart. He would forgive the people who had once stoned him, and he would win their hearts, not through force, but through mercy. But that moment would come later. For now, he was back in Mecca, with a message to continue, a mission to uphold, and a Lord who had never left his side. The journey from Taif to Mecca was not simply the retracing of steps. It was a passage through hardship, humility, and renewed purpose. It marked a turning point in the Prophet's life, not because it brought ease, but because it revealed that even in rejection, the seeds of future success could be planted. It taught him, and those who followed him, that Allah's plan is not always seen in immediate victories, but in the quiet unfolding of events that carry meaning beyond what the eye can see. And so, the Prophet walked forward, once again placing his trust in the one who guides all steps, knowing that the road of Dawah is long, but never walked alone. The road between Taif and Mecca was not only a path across valleys and mountains, but also a journey of spiritual depth, lined with lessons for the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He had endured rejection in its harshest form. He had been wounded not only in body but in the heart. Yet even as the dust of Taif faded behind him and the hills of Mecca came into view, the Prophet continued to walk with trust in the one who had never forsaken him. The world had turned its back, but the doors of the unseen were about to open. It was during this journey back from Taif, while resting in a remote valley called Nakhla, that something remarkable happened. There, under the veil of night, as the Prophet stood in solitude and recited the Quran aloud in prayer, a group of listeners approached not from the towns or tribes of Arabia, but from among the jinn, the unseen beings created by Allah from smokeless fire. They were drawn by the beauty of the Quran, its rhythm and power, unlike anything they had heard. While men had rejected him and turned their faces away, these unseen beings turned toward him, listening with attention and awe. The Prophet did not know at first that they were there. He was immersed in his recitation, offering the words of Allah into the night air, his voice rising and falling with the flow of the verses. He had no audience, or so it seemed. Yet in the unseen, hearts were stirring. These jinn were not hostile or mischievous. They were seekers of truth, wanderers in search of light. As they heard the Quran, something awakened within them. The message that had failed to touch the hearts of the leaders of Taif now found a home in a realm that no human eyes could see. After listening, the jinn returned to their own kind and began to share what they had discovered. They spoke of a scripture that confirmed what had come before it, a message that guided to the truth and the straight path. They declared their belief and warned others not to oppose this revelation. In a short span of time, the seeds of Islam were being carried into the hidden corners of creation. The Prophet had planted truth in Taif, but the harvest came in a place he had not even known was ripe. This moment was not a small footnote in the Prophet's journey. It became part of divine revelation. Allah revealed verses in the Quran, confirming that a group of jinn had listened to the Prophet's recitation and had believed. In Surah Al-Jinn, the conversation of these unseen believers was preserved. They said, "We have heard a wondrous Quran. It guides to righteousness, so we have believed in it, and we will never associate anyone with our Lord." Their voices, though never heard by the people of Mecca or Taif, were given space in the eternal speech of Allah. Their belief was honored, their sincerity recorded, their journey of faith made known to all. This encounter served as a profound reminder that success in da'wah is not always measured by what is seen. The Prophet had gone to Ta'if seeking human allies and had found none. Yet on his return, Allah granted him followers from among the jinn, unseen and unexpected. Where rejection had bruised his heart, belief came from a source he could not have anticipated. The Prophet did not ask for it. He did not summon them. But in his sincerity and commitment to continue reciting the Quran even when alone, the path to their hearts was open. There is a deep lesson in this moment. The Prophet never stopped delivering the message, even when the visible world seemed deaf to it. His duty was never to guarantee results. It was to keep going, to keep speaking, to keep trusting. Allah showed him that no sincere effort is ever wasted. Even when people do not respond, even when the roads are empty, even when the crowds are hostile, the truth still finds its way. Allah can bring listeners from where none are expected. He can open hearts that no human effort could ever reach. The visit of the jinn was also a comfort. After the pain of Ta'if, after the long, quiet journey back to Mecca, the Prophet was reminded that he was not alone. The support of Allah was always near, sometimes in the form of companionship, sometimes in the form of revelation, and sometimes through the belief of those hidden from human sight. This companionship was not only symbolic, it was real, recorded in the Quran and affirmed in the Prophet's own experience. He now knew that his message had crossed not just human boundaries, but the boundaries of worlds. When the Prophet later returned to his companions in Mecca, he did not speak of vengeance or complaint. He brought news of the unseen. He shared what Allah had revealed about the jinn who had believed. This brought strength to the hearts of the believers. They too had been feeling the pressure of rejection, the loneliness of holding on to truth in a city that resisted it. To know that others, even from the unseen, were accepting Islam gave them hope. It reminded them that the reach of Allah's mercy extends beyond what human eyes can witness. The message of Islam was not confined to the walls of Mecca or the pathways of Ta'if. It was being carried across realms, through hearts, by the will of the Almighty. This episode in the Prophet's life also teaches patience in da'wah. The Prophet had poured his heart into his mission. He had been insulted, stoned, turned away, yet he kept reciting the Quran. He kept praying. He did not allow bitterness to take root in his heart. He did not speak ill of those who had harmed him. He simply returned to his Lord, and through that return, doors were opened that no man could have imagined. His example became a lesson for all who would follow him. Continue to do your part with sincerity, and leave the rest to Allah. The night at Nakhla stands as one of those rare and beautiful moments in the Seerah, a moment when the veil between the seen and unseen is gently lifted, and we are allowed to witness the subtle ways in which Allah supports his messenger. The Prophet, who had just endured one of the most difficult experiences of his mission, was given a gift of faith from a source that could not be measured by human standards. He was shown that Allah's army includes beings both visible and hidden, and that his plan is always unfolding, even when it seems the world has closed its doors. From Ta'if to Nakhla, from rejection to unseen belief, the Prophet's journey became a living proof that the path of truth is not determined by applause or numbers. It is marked by sincerity, perseverance, and deep reliance on the one who sees what no eye can see and knows what no heart yet understands. With the verses of Surah Al-Jinn now part of the Quran, that moment in the valley is preserved forever, not just as a story of jinn who believed, but as a testimony to a prophet who never stopped delivering the message, even when no one seemed to be listening. That is the light of prophethood, shining even in the quietest places, witnessed by creation seen and unseen. Years passed. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, continued his mission with the same unwavering resolve that had carried him through the valleys of hardship. From the dark silence of Mecca's opposition to the cruel rejection at Ta'if, his heart never turned away from his duty. The pain of the past was not forgotten, but it became part of a deeper wisdom, shaping his character with every trial. Through patience, prayer, and unshakable faith, he had endured. Now, after the migration to Medina, and the years of struggle that followed, victory was within reach. The Quraysh had finally been humbled. Mecca had been opened, and with it, the path to reconciliation stood before him. The conquest of Mecca was unlike any conquest the world had seen. The prophet entered the city not as a vengeful ruler, but as a man of humility and mercy. His head was bowed low upon his camel, not lifted in pride. His companions surrounded him, not to dominate the city by force, but to protect it from the chaos that usually followed such events. Bloodshed was avoided. The idols in the Kaaba were destroyed. The prophet forgave his former enemies, many of whom had plotted his death, insulted his family, and fought him in battle. His forgiveness was complete. There was no humiliation for those who had surrendered. There was only the reminder that this was not his triumph alone. It was the fulfillment of Allah's promise. With Mecca now secure, and the hearts of many of its people softened by the prophet's clemency, he turned his attention once again to the city that had once expelled him with violence. Taif still stood proud in its hills, still holding tightly to its customs, still removed from the call that had now reached the furthest corners of Arabia. The prophet had not forgotten the pain of that place. The memory of bloodied feet and mocking laughter remained, but so too remained his concern for their guidance. He had not closed the chapter of Taif. He had simply waited for the right moment. In the wake of the conquest, many tribes had begun to approach the prophet, seeking treaties, guidance, and understanding. Islam was no longer the voice of a small persecuted group. It had become the movement of a rising nation. Yet Taif remained distant, unyielding. The tribe of Thaqif, known for its pride and strength, watched the changes with caution. They had long refused the message. Now they feared what might come. Would the prophet, empowered by victory, return to them in anger? Would he demand retribution for their cruelty? Would he come to crush them as others had been crushed in the conquests of history? But the prophet's heart was not moved by vengeance. He had been sent as a mercy to all worlds. His past suffering did not dictate his future actions. When the time came to approach Taif again, he did so with patience and strategy. He did not storm the city in blind rage. Instead, he allowed time to soften hearts. He sent messages of peace. He engaged their leaders with diplomacy. A siege was laid around the city, not to starve it into submission, but to demonstrate that the age of opposition was passing. Still, the people of Taif resisted, holding tightly to their ways, unwilling to change in the face of growing truth. Eventually, the siege was lifted. The prophet chose not to force their surrender. He knew that faith planted under duress rarely takes root. He had come not to conquer their walls, but to invite their hearts. He returned to Medina and waited. Time, he knew, would reveal what force never could. True transformation cannot be rushed. It must come willingly, when the soul is ready. And the moment did arrive. The leaders of Thaqif, after much hesitation and internal debate, decided to send a delegation to the prophet. They had watched how he treated others who had once been enemies. They had seen that he did not humiliate those who came to him. They had heard the words of those who once mocked him and now prayed beside him. The world had changed, and they could not remain untouched. When the delegation reached Medina, they were not met with harshness. They were welcomed. They were given space to speak, to ask, to consider. The prophet did not demand immediate conversion. He allowed them to sit, to listen, and to weigh what they once scorned. Among the conditions they proposed was the request that they be exempted from prayer and from destroying their idols for a time. They hoped to enter Islam while still clinging to some of their former customs. But the prophet, though merciful, did not compromise on the fundamentals of faith. He gently explained that Islam did not bend for convenience. The core of belief was surrender, and surrender could not come with exceptions. Still, he gave them time. He treated them with respect, and in time they accepted the truth. Taif embraced Islam, not under the weight of swords, but through the pull of character. The same city that had once driven the prophet out with stones now sent its people to sit before him, to take his hand in allegiance, to declare that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. It was a moment that testified to the power of patience, the strength of forgiveness, and the quiet victory that comes when truth is carried with love rather than pride. The prophet did not remind them of their past. He did not recount the pain of their rejection. He did not make them bow in apology. Instead, he smiled. He welcomed them as brothers. He accepted their Islam and gave them dignity. What had once been a place of humiliation now became a community of believers. What had once wounded him now became part of the living Ummah. This return to Taif was not a return to reclaim pride or settle old scores. It was a return to complete the message. The prophet had always seen beyond the moment. He had always looked to what hearts could become, not just what they were. His long journey, from Mecca to Taif, from rejection to welcome, had not been in vain. Every wound, every prayer, every quiet night spent in supplication had led to this. He had not only changed the hearts of men, but had transformed an entire city through the simple, steady power of mercy. In that transformation lies one of the clearest signs of the prophet's greatness. His victory was not built on conquest, but on character. He taught his followers not only how to believe, but how to forgive. He showed them that the path to lasting change is not paved with anger, but with love, sincerity, and resilience. In the end, it was not the sword that opened Taif, it was the prophet's patience. And so, the journey that began in blood and sorrow ended in peace and submission. The prophet had returned, not as a wounded man, but as a messenger fulfilled. He had carried the truth into the darkest corners, and even there, light had finally bloomed. The story of the Prophet Muhammad's journey to Taif and the way he handled rejection is more than a historical account. It is a mirror that reflects the depth of his character and the unmatched resilience of his spirit. When we study this moment in his life, we are not just observing the hardships of a man who faced cruelty and humiliation. We are witnessing how faith can turn pain into strength, how love for humanity can overcome hatred, and how the heart of a prophet remains soft, even when the world around him turns hard. It is in these moments that the essence of his mission becomes most visible, not in the grandeur of conquest or the triumph of numbers, but in the quiet resolve of a man who continued to walk, continued to pray, and continued to believe, even when all doors seemed to close. The journey to Taif teaches that rejection is not the end of the road, but often the beginning of a deeper connection with Allah. The prophet did not allow the cruelty of others to make him bitter or break his resolve. His pain became a means to draw closer to his Lord. His prayer beneath the orchard trees was not a cry of despair, but an expression of hope, faith, and complete reliance. He did not ask for the destruction of his enemies. He did not demand that the earth open and swallow them. He asked only for the assurance that his Lord was not displeased with him. That was enough for him. His standard for success was not worldly approval. It was divine acceptance. This response to rejection is what separates the prophet from others who have led people. Most leaders, when scorned, seek to retaliate or withdraw. They count their losses and protect their pride. The prophet, however, stayed open. His heart remained tender. He saw beyond the moment, beyond the sting of insults and the ache of wounds. He saw what people could become, not just what they were. His dawah was not a campaign to win arguments. It was an effort to save souls. Even when people threw stones, he still wanted them to be guided. Even when they mocked his message, he still wished for their salvation. This level of compassion is not found in ordinary hearts. It is the mark of one who carries the responsibility of mercy for the entire world. What the prophet endured in Taif could have justified a lifetime of bitterness, yet he forgave. He forgave not just with words, but with actions. Years later, when he returned to the city that had wounded him, he did not come to remind them of their cruelty. He came to offer them the message once more. He did not demand apologies. He did not seek justice in the form of punishment. He sought only their belief. This capacity for forgiveness was not born from forgetfulness. It came from the clarity of purpose. The prophet understood that the mission was greater than his own suffering. His goal was not to protect his honor, but to carry the light of guidance to every heart, no matter how dark it might have seemed. For those who walk the path of da'wah today, the story of Taif is a reminder that rejection is inevitable, and often painful. People may not welcome the truth. They may insult those who bring it. They may respond to kindness with cruelty, but the way forward is not to meet hardness with hardness. It is to return to the example of the prophet, who met rejection with patience, who answered hatred with mercy, and who never let the hostility of others distract him from the beauty of his mission. He understood that the seeds of faith take time to grow, and that sometimes they must be planted with tears. There is a quiet nobility in how the prophet handled his disappointment. He did not make grand speeches condemning those who hurt him. He did not build his legacy on tales of personal suffering. Instead, he continued to serve. He continued to teach. He continued to pray in the night for those who had harmed him during the day. His connection to Allah was the root from which his patience and strength grew. When the world closed its doors, he found a way forward in prayer. When people turned their backs, he turned his face to the heavens. In that, we find a model not only for resilience, but for grace. The story also teaches that success in da'wah is not always visible. The prophet did not return from Ta'if with supporters or alliances. He did not win over the leaders of Ta'if in that moment. Yet his journey bore fruit in ways he could not see at the time. The jinn who heard the Quran and believed, the servant Adas who embraced Islam in the orchard, the eventual acceptance of Islam by the people of Taif, all of these came as a result of that journey. They were not immediate, but they were real. Allah rewards sincerity, even if its results are hidden for years. The prophet never saw his mission as a series of successes and failures. He saw it as a trust to be carried with love, regardless of outcome. In the final chapters of his life, the prophet had every reason to stand in glory. He had led armies, signed treaties, and watched tribes embrace Islam in waves. Yet he remained the same man who once walked alone to Ta'if with Zayd at his side. He never forgot the lessons of that journey. He never let his later victories make him forget the pain that had shaped him. His humility remained, rooted in the memory of being driven from a city, of standing in prayer under the trees, of tasting the sweetness of belief in the midst of rejection. For believers today, this moment in the prophet's life remains a source of inspiration. It reminds us that dignity is not found in how others treat us, but in how we respond. It teaches that pain can be a path to nearness with Allah. It encourages us to be steadfast in the face of hardship, to speak the truth with kindness, and to never give up on people, even when they give up on us. The prophet's example in Ta'if is not just about da'wah. It is about the kind of person we should all strive to become: patient, hopeful, sincere, and ever trusting in the wisdom of our Lord. And so, the story of Ta'if does not end in pain. It ends in transformation. A city once filled with scorn became a place of Islam. A man once wounded by its people returned with open arms. A journey that began in sorrow became a testimony to the power of faith. Through it all, the prophet remained true not just to his mission, but to his character. He showed that the greatest strength is not in victory over others, but in mastery over the self. In that mastery, guided by revelation and anchored in love, he showed the world what it truly means to be the messenger of Allah.